So again, these were some of the major hiring forces in chemical engineering. I probably did not discuss all, so we are also concerned with environmental. We are also, a lot of chemical engineers are hired by semiconductor companies and things like that. Our opportunities are endless, and as chemical engineers, our paths are the most versatile of the classical engineering field that you will have been introduced to in this course module. And as you can see, we go for anywhere from biology to oils to uh, to consumer products, consumer electronics. We're everywhere. Whereas, for example, civil engineers, which I'm not trivializing, but they are mostly concerned with large structures, with construction, with things like that, and they're not as versatile. They have a specific path. Uh, I want you to refer to, as far as scale up is concerned, to the reading that you were supposed to have done prior to this lecture on ibuprofen, where they show you somehow how pharmaceutical scientists and pharmaceutical engineers were able to scale up ibuprofen tablets from uh, a chemical synthesis standpoint to to the consumer directly. And so at this point, you should have read that, and you should understand what scale up uh, process is about, and it gives you sort of an introduction to mass production. And again, I wanted today discuss material selection rather than scale up and mass production. But it's very important to understand how important these are. Just for in an interest of time, I want to just focus on one thing in detail. So this I want to talk about this next topic, which will be a topic for discussions afterwards in discussion boards on Moodle, and that is the difference between chemists and chemical engineers. And I'll be honest with you. I'll give you my own example. Is when I was in high school and I was asked, I wanted to figure out what it is I'm going to do when I grow up. All I knew about myself was that I loved chemistry and I loved mathematics and I kind of liked physics. And so I looked around and said I could do chemistry or I could do math, but they didn't look that interesting to me for some reason. I sort of gravitated towards engineering. I saw the confluence of both chemistry and math, and I thought it was just my own preconceived notion that chemical engineering, all that is just chemistry and math a whole lot together. I didn't really know what that was. And I hope that you are sort of in the same boat, where you think chemical engineering is just a very highly mathematical chemistry. And that is a wrong, that is absolutely wrong. It's not the right thing to think about that. That's not what we actually do, but it is very much a good push, a good incentive to go in towards chemical engineering. And I would say a large portion of chemical engineering students actually believe that to begin with. So let's start talking about what chemists and chemical engineers do and how they differ. So a chemist will figure out how to make ibuprofen. So if I'm a chemist, uh, someone tells me we need to come up with a new drug, um, and this new drug needs to have this functional group and that functional group, and it's got to have a benzene there or a benzene here or there, whatever. Uh, my job as a chemist is to figure out how do I synthesize that, how do I make that. So this person wants to have this final product. Let me make it for them. Okay, so they start using organic synthesis or inorganic synthesis or whatever it is that they need to do to. And again, I'm not as versed in chemistry as these synthetic chemists are, but they need to figure out how to make this drug. And then once they make this drug, they have to figure out how to purify that on a lab scale, right? So, for example, they need to figure out how to make decaf coffee, for example. Well, that's a chemical engineering problem in general, but let's say in the lab you started as a chemist, you have to figure out how to decaffeinate coffee beans. Okay, so again, lab scale is very small, in a few grams, milligrams, whatever. So they take ground coffee and they say, okay, caffeine is a very organic molecule, so it will dissolve in uh, these organic solvents that we have, oils or whatever. So they put the beans through oil, and then they see that the caffeine comes out of the oil, and then the rest of the coffee stays intact. So they're happy. So they show that they were able to sort of fractionate into these two streams. So they figure out how to decaf coffee. Okay, great. Uh, That's where their job ends. They figured it out. They're happy. That's it. Chemical engineers need to understand how to kind of bring this up. A lot of times we sort of bypass the chemist altogether. So going back to this decaffeination idea, I have coffee and I want to make it for the entirety of the country, right? I work for Maxwell Coffee House, and I want to make decaf coffee, a new blend. Let's say it's the 1960s and it hasn't been done yet. So I'm newly in charge of decaf coffee. So a chemist told me that they were able to do that just by dissolving the caffeine out using an organic solvent. Great, I could do that. Organic solvents are very expensive, so for me to decaf all the coffee for all people in the country, I need to buy a whole lot of, say, toluene, and toluene costs a lot of money. And so for me to get tons and tons and tons of toluene, I have to put in tons and tons of money. So maybe that's not a good idea. Okay, so that's one way for me to start thinking about that and say, I don't want to go the chemist's way. I got to think of something else. Another reason I might not go the chemist's way is I figured out that once I decaffeinate the coffee, a lot of the toluene stays in the coffee, and toluene is not very nice for you. Kind of toxic. So when people drink toluene, it will sort of stay in their body. Since it's fat soluble, it's not going to go in the blood. It's going to stay in their fat reserves, and who knows what's gonna do later on in their lives. Let's just stay away from that. So from a regulation standpoint, maybe I don't want to go the chemist's route. So I have to figure out another way for it to happen. So as chemical engineers, we take courses in separations, where we discuss how we separate things physically and chemically, not necessarily using organic solvents. So if you go the chemical engineering way, you'll be discussing ideas such as freeze drying. Maybe you can fractionate them by boiling them, or melting one and not the other, things like that. And you sort of understand, and you can do the math behind that and figure out the exact success rate for it. So I'd like to now talk about the article that you have read about the scale-up of ibuprofen. And ibuprofen, you all know, is a drug we take for painkilling ability. Specifically, people take it for headaches, but you can use it for any sort of pain relief. And this article, I apologize that it is not written the best way, but it's representative of scale-up procedure that they have done out in India, and I suppose they have not edited the writing so well before publishing it. But it's okay, it still gets the point across, I hope. So in that article, they nicely sort of tell you the importance of scale-up, and they say that in pharmaceuticals, there are actually two ways of talking about scale-up. The classical way, which we know as chemical engineers, is about making the batches larger so you can produce them on a large scale. The other way of scale-up in biochemistry is basically improving the yield. That's another way of improving the yield. So that's not a term that we will use in our discussion. It's just they make it known that there are two terms, one term that is used in two different contexts. So they go on and they discuss what scale-up means to chemical engineering, specifically from their own perspective of making ibuprofen. And they raise three important issues. There is the lab bench scale, and that's what I was discussing earlier about chemists versus chemical engineers. Lab bench, that's what a chemist would do. They would produce this ibuprofen sample, and it would be in the order of milligram to gram, something like that. And that's not very usable for the consumers, but you can certainly use that scale to characterize the drug or whatever it is that you're trying to make. Specifically in this case, it's a drug. So you can, for example, find its enthalpy of formation, its molecular weight, its boiling point, its degradation point, different things like that, its reactivity. That's all valid within this sort of scale and length scale. What they discuss, and it's true, this particular next scale is true for not just pharmaceuticals, but also for consumer products and for foods and things like that, is the pilot scale. That's sort of an intermediate scale that's between the large production scale that you make for the entire country and the lab bench. So what you do, if a lot of chemical engineers that would go into, let's say, for example, work for Dove soap at Unilever, before you create a mass production of the Dove soap for the whole country, you can create these pilot scale type products that are on the order of several kilograms. So definitely you can make several. Let's say you're making soap, you can make 4, 5, 6, 10 different tablets of soap, and you can test that with consumers. You can send it to regulation bodies and things like that, and that's very useful for you because you're in this case created sort of like a mini production of it, and it tells you, one, will this be successful later on if I do it on a mass scale? And two, do I even want to invest because maybe it's going to fail all these regulations and things like that. So it's a very important intermediate step. And then lastly, it's the production scale and manufacturing scale, and that's the third scale. They also call it, if you could see on the right here, trial batch, exhibit batch, and validation batch. That's valid for them. And then again, what the terms you want to keep in mind are lab bench scale, pilot scale, and production scale. Those are the three scales that you discuss, and chemical engineers specifically are interested in production scale. Okay, so they give you very nicely the chemistry of the production of ibuprofen. You can see here I copied and pasted it from the article. They both of them they start from the same starting ingredient, which is a byproduct of crude oil, and there are two ways of doing that. There's the brute process and then the Hoechst process. The Hoechst process includes several different catalysts, and it was created later on, and that was in response to the brute process. The brute process was the traditional way of doing this. It's just that they found that even though it was a straightforward way of getting there, they found that there were a lot of steps. As you can see, there are 4 or 5 steps here, and then there's a lot of waste from this material. Specifically, they were discussing the aluminum chloride. The aluminum chloride goes to waste here, and then if you're wasting a catalyst in your production, you're wasting a material, and if you're wasting a material, it's going to drive up the cost of the ibuprofen. Not very environmentally safe, not very economically favorable for your company. So they come up with a Hoechst process, which takes a lot less steps. I see here 3 steps. You get to your product, and it's much more green, much more environmentally safe, and things like that. They then use their own terminology for lab bench, pilot scale, and production scale, like I was saying on the right here. That's directly from the article, and they're telling you why they did that. And again, the trial batch, which is the scale up, they were doing that to characterize the material. The exhibit batch, which is the pilot scale, and if you work in these companies, it's called pilot plant. That they send that to regulatory bodies. Maybe for samples for consumers. Maybe they want to send it around. You go out to the center of the city, and sometimes they have samples that they send out like that. Maybe they wanted that to see kind of opinion polls and things like that. And then lastly, they did the validation batch, and the validation batch is basically a scale up, a full blown scale up, mass production, and they did it in 3 different batches, and they made sure basically using these 3 different batches that the machines were working well, that the instruments are well equipped for mass production and for the process, and they note that even though they're making this, they're not gonna have this wasted. So these 3 batches that they're doing to validate it, they're still gonna go and sell them at the end of the day. But it sort of gives them an idea of what's gonna happen if they do produce that on a mass scale later on. Okay. So just to sort of end this, chemists and chemical engineers differ quite a bit. Chemists are concerned with reactions on the benchtop and how to purify it, and they don't care how to do that. We are concerned more with how do I make this on a large scale? How do I mix all these things? How do these things, when I mix them, think about that. When I make decaf coffee, uh, let's say I do use the chemist's route and I'm using these solvents to decaffeinate it. Sure, let's say I do that. I found a green solvent to do that. And it's happy regulation wise and it's not a problem. Well, now I have to mix them into these solvents and I have to design these pipes that will hold them. So to take it out of the reactor and flow it into somewhere else where it's going to get separated, I have to understand how these things flow. So things like fluid dynamics, fluid mechanics, I need to understand how things flow through pipes and how fast they'll go, how slow they go, things like that. Also, the decaffeination process, it's got some kinetics in it. How fast is it going to go? How slow is it going to go? How can I speed it up because my boss really wants it to happen by Thursday rather than, by the end of next week. So how do I speed it up? When I speed it up, is it going to heat up too much? Do I have to reinforce the reactors with more metal or more ceramic and things like that? And so the equipment itself is very important. And we have to discuss, like I said, regulations and how do we transport these products to the consumers. And there's a lot of other things. So when you discuss this in the discussion boards later on after this lecture, keep these in mind. And I want you specifically to use sort of preconceived notions that you had yourselves. Maybe you thought that chemists and chemical engineers do the same thing. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you had an idea right away. So share it with the class. And when you do that, I want you to go back after you share it with the class and respond to at least one of the students' comment, and just once. And then I will periodically go in there as well, and I will give my 2 cents as well. And hopefully, out of that discussion, you'll have an intimate understanding of how we are not like chemists, uh, and how chemists are not like us. Uh, there are definitely overlaps, but we're mostly different.